What if the way we've traditionally taught music has been missing some crucial aspects of how children actually learn? On this episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast, I'm talking with Melanie Bowes, founder of the KeyNotes curriculum, who spent years developing a more holistic approach to music learning that fills those gaps. Melanie shares why group classes can be more powerful than one-on-one lessons, the critical role of autonomy in student engagement, and how these things shape success. We're exploring how music education can enrich lives rather than just prepare students for exams. This conversation challenges some fundamental assumptions about music teaching and offers a different path forward. Stay tuned. If you're a guitar instructor and you've used one of the dozen or so popular method books, you've probably noticed that gap between what's in the books and what students actually want to learn. Most guitar students want to play their favorite songs, and that means strumming, chord changes, timing. If that stuff is even in those method books, it's usually way in the back. I put together the exercises in Complete Guitar Strumming to cover the foundational concepts that all guitar students need, but in a practical way that applies to their goals, which is playing their favorite songs. For instructors, the book comes with an instructor companion guide that walks you through best practices for teaching. I even have training videos that I've used with my own staff that you can access as well. The guide and the videos are free for anyone who wants to use the book for teaching. If you want to get really deep and understand the origins of the book, you can go listen to episode 50 of this podcast or just head over to rockschoolproprietor.com/book for all the details. Welcome to Rock School Proprietor Podcast. My name is John Kazicki, and joining me today is a former classroom music teacher, founder of group piano curriculum KeyNotes Music, and a champion of a more holistic approach to teaching and learning music. And she is in the final stages of her PhD in music education. Melanie Bowes, how are you today?
Hello. Very well, thank you.
Good. I'm very pleased to have you on the podcast. And I think we're going to talk a lot about understanding how kids learn and effectiveness of groups framed around the curriculum that you created, KeyNotes, which I understand it's about almost a decade that you've been teaching KeyNotes and offering. Has it been an offering for other studios for that long, or is it something that you've been teaching for that long?
No, so I started out teaching it, absolutely had no idea where it would go, where it has come. And about 3 years into teaching it, I had actually some teachers in the US over Facebook just saying, when are you going to make this curriculum available? It sounds amazing. And I thought, okay, that could happen. So, my background is in curriculum design, teacher training, all of those things that kind of have contributed to KeyNotes Music. So it kind of made perfect sense to package it up as a licensed program, as I have done.
And because you were teaching in a classroom prior to developing KeyNotes, is that correct?
Yeah.
And how did the class... Okay. And how did that classroom experience influence the approach that you took with developing the curriculum?
So that's a really great question. So basically, with my background, I think as teachers, we all have our kind of areas of what that we're particularly passionate about. And in music, you can very easily walk into a classroom of 30 children, as I often did. So let's take a class of 30 11-year-olds, and you'll have someone, I'm teaching them general music, so not a specific instrument. And you'll have someone on one end of the spectrum who has been learning the piano for nearly their whole life. Grade 8, we're very exams focused here in the UK, so they might have grade 8 on the piano, so they're phenomenal for their age. Had lots of opportunities in music. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I might have someone who has never even heard a live instrument before, has never had any opportunities in music education. And my job was to not only make sure that those that had not experienced music before didn't feel completely isolated and unable to achieve in my classroom, but also to make sure that person who probably felt like they could do everything, there's more for them to still do, right? So I'm challenging and supporting everyone within that really big spectrum of ability and experience. So I
Okay.
took that kind of experience into creating KeyNotes.
And what aspects, now you mentioned having a mix of students in that classroom, and some maybe have experience playing piano already, maybe years of experience. What aspects of private lessons, that one-to-one approach, do you feel are beneficial to students? And then where might there be those gaps that you were alluding to?
Okay, so they were clearly really excellent at the technical aspects of playing the piano or whatever instrument it might be that they played. And I would encourage them, obviously, to bring their instruments in if they didn't play the piano. They could, play some very difficult repertoire. They generally had very sound knowledge of the fundamentals. Obviously, getting to a high level on their instrument, they would need to have good theory. The way everything's set up here, you have to be a certain level, have a certain level of theory knowledge to get to those higher grades. So in a sense, it looked like they were an all-around brilliant musician. But I always found the gaps. So often they couldn't improvise. They'd never learnt how. They'd never had opportunities to improvise. They couldn't obviously then compose, which kind of is almost a follow-on. I would get them accompanying the class. So accompanying is a very specific skill that they won't have had an opportunity to practice. If they are pianists, then playing with others is going to be something that they haven't really had experience in doing. So I would take all of those, in a way, more creative aspects of being a musician, and I would develop those in those kind of high level players.
It reminds me of a conversation I had with Tim Topham, and Tim was talking about all of those skills that you just mentioned, the improvising, the accompaniment, playing together, that I think they just, there's just different goals, I think, in private lessons alone. And it's almost as if you're in a vacuum where this is how you perform and you achieve those goals in that one-to-one setting. And the students are getting feedback from the instructor. Yes, you're doing great on this technical aspect of it. Yes, you understand how to do these things, but it's that working practical knowledge when you take those skills and you apply them in a different way that I think is missing. And me coming from the rock school background, it's almost like it's flipped. We're so focused on how do we get the students really comfortable with these practical aspects of playing so that they can communicate using music back and forth. Now,
and I think that word communication is so important, because the way that, certainly in the UK, the exams-based system that we have, where, they might take 2 or 3 years to get to grade 1. And then in each grade, which they're generally expected to spend a year on each grade. So each grade, they learn 3 pieces, they learn numerous scales, and they learn a certain, level of sight reading, and they'll do some oral skills as well. But what happens is that it becomes just so kind of repertoire driven, these 3 pieces that they learn, and then they go on to the next grade and they learn 3 more pieces, that there's no real focus on that communication, on the context of the music. So I remember very sadly ask a girl in one of my classes not that long ago. She told me she was going to do her grade 8 exam that afternoon, and I said, "Oh, what are you playing?" And she didn't know. She said, "Oh, it's like A1, B3, because you get list A, list B, list C, and C4." And I was like, "Okay, so who composed A1?" No idea. And I just thought, to me, that is such a failure of, you can go and you can sit your grade 8 exam and you can pass. But if you don't even know what you're playing and the context of the composer who created what you're playing, and then surely there's so much communication in how you play that's going to be missing.
It's incredibly rote. Yeah. Everything is very rote, and it's I told this story on a previous podcast about taking my daughter to her first concert, and she was jumping around and singing and dancing, and I was sitting and watching the band. And she turned to me at one point and said, "Why are you just sitting down?" And I realized in that moment that, like, when I've become so focused on the technical aspects of a performance and a band and understanding, like, all of those things, that in a concert setting, I've lost focus of why people are there.
Mm,
And that is to enjoy music. And it is funny how easy it is to lose focus of what it is that we're doing, which is trying to facilitate people communicating through
yeah.
music.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit to those early days when you were developing keynotes or had the idea. You're also a parent, and from what I understand, that perspective was also instrumental in the development of the curriculum.
It was, yeah.
As a parent, not as a music teacher, as a parent, what kind of experience were you looking for your children?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I was drawn, as lots of teachers are, by the way, to the Suzuki method,
Mm,
which is, well, there are very specific aspects within the Suzuki method that I really liked. One is that the parent is very involved. So the parent sits in the lesson, takes notes, and the parent is the kind of home teacher or practice, the parent practices with the child every day. So I really liked that. I thought, how does anyone learn an instrument without that input from their parent? I liked the fact that you could start young. My son started age 4 to learn the cello. But also what's happened within that method is that you do your individual lessons, but you also do group lessons. And you also do concerts, recitals, and you do group concerts and residentials where, my kids every year, they'll play in a group of 120 cellists in a big hall, all playing the same thing, with the more advanced kids playing a more advanced version of the piece. And the kids that have only just started, just moving their bow up and down, practicing their skills,
mhm,
not fists like that, but and I was just so drawn to it being about the joy of music making while still being very, high quality teaching. I mean, the teaching that they have received has been absolutely phenomenal, and I've enjoyed watching every minute of it. So that's kind of the choice I made as a parent. Now, I'm a music teacher. I want my kids to have a lot of music in their lives, but I'm probably not your average parent. So what's been interesting is that when I first set Ruben up with his cello lessons, I had a few of his friends' mums saying to me, "Oh, I'd love my child to do some music," because all parents know that their children respond to music. It's like a natural, intuitive kind of response. But I don't want them to do. I think they're too young for one-on-one. I think that is too intense, which
mhm.
I would tend to agree with without the right teacher and the right training and the right format, which Suzuki has. But they didn't want to do that. So I said, "Oh, I'll set something up. I can do
Mhm.
some music lessons," which is how I started. Part of the reason why I started KeyNotes, because I just saw this need for this slightly more creative, slightly less formal kind of music class where they would learn the piano, but we would do it through, topics and themes and creativity and listening to a wide variety of music. So I listened to other parents and what their kind of needs were in terms of what they wanted for their own children as well. So it's kind of, that's how it came about, really.
I think there's something beautiful in that you understood the technical aspects of teaching and learning music, but also you were very tuned in to what parents wanted and felt like they needed for their kids.
Uh-huh.
And all of those things that you were saying about the sort of the disconnect between the intense aspects of studying one-to-one that are somewhat removed from the enjoyable play-based aspects of
Yeah.
learning music. You saw immediately from that perspective, both sides. I'm a parent and this is what I want because this is what all my other parent friends are talking about, but also I'm a musician and this is how I can bring those two together. I think that's amazing.
Mhm.
So KeyNotes then started as what was I suppose the age range that was the initial focus when you
So the
first
initial
developed it?
focus was age 6 plus, quickly added age 4 to 5. And for a while, those were the two kind of main programs and main age groups. There is a perception that until a child is at a certain kind of level of reading, like, reading literature based reading, there's no point in learning the piano. But I would argue that that is because a lot of methods are reading based and they don't need to be.
Yes. Hmm.
So you can indeed develop so many skills and nurture so many concepts in children before they are reading words or reading music. So that was kind of, I guess I started with the age 6 plus because that's what I knew of piano learning around me. But then I quickly realized that there are so many skills that we can develop. That age 4 is particularly, I don't know if you can remember back to your children being age 4, but they are, sponges. And that is
Yeah.
when, if we can, I think, instill the joy at that age and instill the kids understand so much about music. They understand how it's communicating to them. And what I really wanted to do was to nurture that, but also to give them the vocab to be able to describe what they could hear. So that's something
Hmm.
else that I've also felt really passionate about, and I realised that can happen at age 4 and 5. Like, we don't need to wait for them to be reading to teach them so many other aspects of music.
It's interesting. I like to draw that parallel between music learning and reading and writing. And it's if I were to say to any parent, oh no, don't bother speaking with your child until they're 5 and
And not
and they can recite the alphabet, you just wouldn't do it. It's insane to think that. And but for whatever reason, that's been adopted in some musical circles where like, oh yeah, don't even start lessons until they're 6 when they can actually read. There's a whole host of things that kids can do before then. So it's almost like you putting them at a slight disadvantage if
yeah.
you are waiting as opposed to trying to lean into those things that can nurture and get them using that language of music before they can actually read and write.
Well, even if you think about even the steps that they should be taking to in order to have readiness, because that's another huge important concept, is the one of readiness. So for them to be ready to even think about reading on the staff, there are so many things that they need to understand and be able to do for that to be even meaningful. They need to know the notes on the piano, the layout, the geography, the steps and skips up and down, so many pitch-based concepts that they can learn before you even show them anything visual. Now, I do show them visual things because I think if we have visual learners in our room, they might find it difficult to grasp onto those concepts without a visual prompt. So I say, let's give them everything. But I don't get them to rely on the reading. I just say,
Yeah.
can you see that this moves a step up, or this is a space note, etc. But there are so many things we need to get to before we start going, middle C, which is very boring as well. Like if we are playing pieces based on what we can read as beginners, how are we going to be engaged by our instrument and the sound we're making? Because it's not interesting to just play endless middle Cs. So therefore, like there's so much they can explore on the piano, so many techniques that we can develop before they learn to read. So yeah, I think that's why I feel really passionately that we can start them younger, and the group setting is so perfect for younger children, because that is the best setting for them, being with their peers, etc.
Now, with KeyNotes starting, or when you initially started KeyNotes, it was roughly that you mentioned 6, and then quickly adapted to 4 and 5-year-olds with that rough 4 to 6 age range. That was the initial focus of KeyNotes. But as a brand, you've developed it into a program for kids and teens and adults. What made you realize that the approach you were taking with the younger kids could successfully be applied to learners at any age?
Well, I think really just teaching the programs myself and these kids growing up. And I have to say, assume that after my initial kind of beginner foundational group classes, that they would then go on to their one-on-one and start their exam work or whatever it was they wanted to do, which, as I say, is the norm here. But they didn't leave, and they didn't want to go to one-on-ones. So I then was like, okay, so let's like create another kind of level, I guess. So the way that it works is that the curriculum is spiraled so that you take your skills and concepts that are appropriate for that age, and you spiral around them so that they are constantly revisiting and deepening their understanding and developing their skills and the fluency of their skills. And then kind of with that age and the expectations we have with that age, and by the way, the lesson plans being made for the attention span and the interests and, of those age groups, they can then move into the next kind of program. And there'll be, obviously, it's still kind of similar skills and concepts because it's still learning to play the piano and being a musician. But then we up level those and have a new kind of spiral, etc. So it just developed as my own students developed. Then, as I said, about 3 years in, people started licensing the programs, and as their needs have developed, there was one really interesting one actually, which was that Storytellers, our program for age 6+, I was happily taking age 9, 10, 11 into Storytellers, but I didn't often get beginners at those ages. In the UK, we start school a whole year earlier than the rest of the world, it seems. So they kind of know that if they want to learn an instrument by age 8, right? So I didn't often get new beginners in at that age. When the US and Australia, particularly in Canada, when they started licensing the program, they said, well, I've got these 11 and 12-year-olds that want to learn, but I feel like Storytellers is going to be too childish for them because it's like based on fairy tales and going, Goldilocks and how she skips through the woods, etc. So then that's when KeyNotes Play for tweens and teens was created. So it's kind of evolved based on need in that sense as well. But at all levels, learners are learners, and we can think about the particular learning needs of each age group and each level, skill level, ability level, etc. But we're still spiraling, we're still adapting and differentiating for each learner in the way that we would for any age group.
So, hard question. If you were, well, maybe hard, if you were to take the education aspect or simply the learning and transfer of knowledge out of the equation, what is your hope that each learner or each student, whether that's the young kids, the teens and tweens, the adults, what's your hope that the students are going to gain from a KeyNotes class or any group music class, I suppose?
So I think the hope for any learner should be that they have autonomy over and choice over their own learning.
Mm-hmm.
Because as
Yeah.
soon as a child or an adult or any learner has that sense of autonomy and has that sense of self within the learning process, then you know that they are going to succeed, you know that they're going to enjoy learning, enjoy music. I think that when we're telling kids what to do and how to do it, which we might feel the need to do because we're experts and they're not, I think that it can be disengaging and it can feel like it's not for them. But I think the main aim of any teaching and learning scenario is that they want to learn and they understand how they can learn, and they put the steps in themselves to make sure that they are progressing and achieving. And that's the dream, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. You just blew my mind with that one word, autonomy. What you described, I think, was my early learning experience. I had piano lessons as a child, about 8 years old, and I had no choice in what I was playing. And I hated the piano lessons, begged my parents to quit. Luckily, I loved music, so I sort of dabbled here and there with piano, and then played in middle school band, and then picked up guitar in my early high school days. And the stark difference between my piano lessons and taking guitar lessons was, in my piano lessons, I had zero choice in what I was learning, or at best, maybe I remember around the holidays, my piano teacher would say, "Would you like to learn this song or this song?" And I would have to choose between those two pieces of sheet music. Whereas when I started guitar lessons, one of the first questions my instructor asked me was, "What kind of music do you like?"
Mm.
As if my choice was going to guide what we did. And so that using that word autonomy really sums up, I don't know, 8 years of, like, 7 years of music learning for me, and like nice bookends from one end to having zero choice and the other end to having a say. And I think that's a great answer.
I think your guitar teacher, what you felt from your guitar teacher was that your voice mattered, and that your, it's not only in kind of repertoire choice, because I think people can get a bit bogged down in repertoire choice as well, like, and can be quite repertoire driven. It's also taking a piece of a song, maybe it's just quite a simple beginner song, and saying, these are the different ways we can play this song. So you can choose, you can play it this way or you can play it this way. And they're just intrinsically motivated by the music. With my observations I did for my PhD, there was one boy who was constantly really determined to get to playing chords because he just loved the sound of chords.
Yeah.
So I'd say, right, well, you need to, in order to be able to do that, you need to kind of, learn the melody first, and then we can add the chords in the left hand. But he worked hard to get to that because he loved the sound of the chords. So that intrinsic motivation as well. And so it's not only in kind of, as I say, the repertoire, it's also in the way that you're playing, the way that you're expressing yourself, just being asked, like, how would you've got a choice. And by the way, I always make it effort based. So you can play it this way. This is like challenge 1, challenge 2, challenge 3. It's never, I've got a group of 6 kids and you're going to play it this way and you're going to play it this way and you're going to play it this way, because that is essentially doing what we've just talked about in a kind of one-on-one, let's turn the page because you're ready to turn the page. It's more dynamic than that. It's kind of more organic, and it's more based on their own relationship with what they're doing. And I think that's where the magic happens.
And I think what you're describing also suggests that as the instructors, as the guides, what are we what are we training our students for? Are we training them to enjoy music for the rest of their lives and be able to apply it in a way that they want? Or are we just training them to pass a test?
Exactly. I
And
think music
I
learning has such an academic process, you know, especially with the exam based or with the tutor, the method book, like level 1, level 2, level 3. When you see those
yeah,
posts where people say, I passed level 2 of my book, well, what does that actually mean? What can you actually do now that you have, passed that level?
right.
But also and I mean, goodness me, I was so motivated by exams growing up. I loved it.
Hmm.
I had quite an unconventional music education, which I think some of the kind of pioneers in music education often have had quite an unconventional upbringing with music education themselves. But once I got to the point where I was doing exams, I absolutely loved it. I got my distinction, flew through the exams and thought it was absolutely brilliant. But again, like I wasn't an average mum in terms of music education, I also wasn't an average child, and not everyone is going to feel motivated by that exam kind of system. And I think often as teachers, we might fall into the trap of teaching mini us's, but we weren't average students because we were going to become musicians, right? So
Yes.
we're like,
Right.
every student is like going to be like me and become either a musician or a music teacher, but often that is not the case at all. And we have to make sure that we're giving everyone the opportunity to take it wherever they want to. So yes, if they want to become a musician, we have to make sure that we're setting everything in their path for that to happen. But we also need to understand and enjoy the fact that there were going to be other directions for other children. And if that's just to enjoy making music and appreciate music, then brilliant.
And I'd argue that in most instances, and you alluded to this as well, but that's what parents want for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Parents want them to experience music, to enrich their lives, to enjoy this art form, not necessarily be able to pass a test or go on to teach music or play in an orchestra or any of those other things, which can be options. But I
Mm-hmm.
think at the core, when most parents decide that music is for their children and they're willing to pay the money for those lessons and those classes, it's about enrichment and about making their lives better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's
Because they,
so
as I said,
important.
can see how their child responds to music, and they
Yeah.
want them to have more opportunities. So yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna start talking a little bit about keynotes and applying that in the classroom and for instructors who might be thinking, oh, after listening to Melanie talk, I think maybe there's something to this. Maybe the method book and the really rote linear path isn't necessarily, the way I want to continue. If an instructor or a studio is thinking about implementing group classes, I think the first thought process and first line of thinking is usually about profitability, right? I can put more students in a classroom versus these one-on-one lessons. And that is certainly a benefit. And I think that's important. But what are those other benefits, both to the instructor and the student in the group learning? And I know we've talked a little bit about them, but what would you say is maybe something that these students will get in group classes that they absolutely cannot get in the one-on-one setting?
Well, I think first of all, I'm a very ardent believer in group learning being collaborative.
Mhm.
So there are lessons whereby everyone is learning by themselves, with children around them. So they've got their headphones on and they're learning, and they're in completely different places in their linear method book to the other children in the room. So I think the first thing is to clarify that when we're talking about the benefits of groups, we are talking about the children all learning together and playing together, because I think the real benefits are that joy that children feel when they're singing with other children, which they often won't do on their own, when they're playing with other, not only playing their instrument, but also, rhythm games, etc. So all these different kind of interactive games that they can play together, interactive musical games, are so important to the benefits of groups. But I think essentially it's just so childlike to play with other children and to be with other children. And there's so much research that says that, that peer relationship and that socialization is such an important aspect of learning and of childhood, that, if they're watching and interacting with each other with the same materials, the learning that they come across is going to be far more impactful than someone who's kind of on high up here, who knows everything there is to know, trying to explain to a kind of 5-year-old. The way that they see each other interacting with music and with the teaching and learning process is just, it's so important. It's everything. And for teachers, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
And teaching a group is so much fun. I mean, I speak to teachers, as you can imagine. I speak to a wide range of teachers, and the ones I love speaking to actually are those that are kind of maybe in their 60s, maybe late 60s, early 70s, who have just got kind of this they've got a second wind. I just want to do it differently to end my career. I'm kind of, they've seen all of those beginners. They feel like they've kind of, even though in reality it's not exactly the same, but they see them one after the other and they feel like they're saying the same thing to each of them. And by the way, they feel like they're saying the same thing to each of them every week, because they come back and they still don't understand what you taught them last week, because that's the way that the learning process is. But if you set it up so that they're having a lot of fun, they're engaging with music, they're being creative, there's multiple opportunities to laugh, to move, to express themselves, then it is a lot more fun for the teacher. And I do believe that kids need this repetition and this spiral kind of cyclical structure for their learning. But that doesn't mean straight repetition, which is I think the kind of, what's the word? If you're teaching one-on-one and you feel like you just have to keep repeating what you're saying to the student, that can be quite frustrating, but it also just doesn't work. If they didn't understand it when you told them last week, they're not going to understand it when you've got the same page in front of them and you're telling them in the same way this week. So I really believe in kind of iterations, like let's do the same, we're kind of communicating the same skills and concepts, but instead of being a pinching crab, we're going to be a snapping alligator, whatever it might be, so they think they're doing something different, but they're still developing the same skills. So it's just a lot of fun for teachers. And I really believe it's interesting what you said about the profitability for teachers and for studio owners. I think that is really important, but I think that we need to also recognize that actually this is the best way for them to learn. This is, in terms of our aims and parents' aims and the kids' aims, this is the best setting for them. So we must, and I also say to teachers, don't communicate about your group lessons based on affordability. It's the same kind of thing. That's not why they should take group lessons, because it's more affordable. They should take group lessons because it's more impactful.
Yes.
It's more engaging.
I want to put those two things side by side. I'm going to put the engaging group classes and the one-on-one lessons together. and view them from a parent's perspective. In one instance where you see week to week the children interacting together and being creative and playing music together, from the parent's perspective, you immediately see those benefits. Again, going back to the idea of what are parents looking for when they're investing in music classes and music lessons for their kids. They want their children to grow up to be a more well-rounded individual. They want them to experience art and creativity. And in one instance, that group setting, that they're seeing that firsthand right there. In the other setting, those private lessons, it takes a lot of faith, the part of the parent and the student, and oftentimes the instructor, to say, this is the path. As long as they continue to follow this path, they will have all the skills to achieve that long-term goal that you had, which is to enjoy music on a different level and to be more well-rounded. There's a lot of like, boy, I hope this is working in that scenario. So I think to be able to express to families and parents in the moment, look at what your child is doing. Look at what, or even your adult classes, look at what you are doing with this instrument from week to week. That's, you're achieving your goal week to week versus that goal is in the future. Yeah. So I'm a huge proponent, 100%. Yeah, I agree.
For sure. And it's really interesting when we had to go online for COVID and suddenly we're all teaching over Zoom. And my parents, I don't let my parents into the lessons weekly, but they do often come in at the end of a book to see us play through the various, with the story or the topic or whatever it might be. But on Zoom, they saw the process as it happened. In other words, obviously the joy and the interaction and the laughter and the fun, but they saw that I was very subtly kind of teaching in different ways to each child and kind of encouraging them to do different things that would develop their individual skill. Or if I'd noticed that a concept wasn't quite embedded, developing that for each individual child. And actually that really helped the parents to see that not only is this engaging and fun and my child really loves it, it's high quality teaching. They are getting their needs met. And I think when you've got those two things, then, obviously that's the ideal kind of circumstance.
Yeah. With the full line of KeyNotes programs that you have available, let's say a studio owner is, again, in that process thinking, maybe group classes are the way to go. If they had to choose just one of those classes in the KeyNotes line, which one would you suggest?
I think most of our teachers and schools and studios absolutely love Storytellers, which is our 6 to 8 program. However, I would also caveat that with it kind of, no one program works in isolation because you'd really want to make sure that you've got that overarching structure that happens when you offer all of them. But when a new studio joins, I definitely encourage them to start with little KeyNotes, which is the age 4 to 5, and then Storytellers, which is the age 6 to 8, and then from there they can add the younger one, which is the piano prep program, and then the older ones.
Okay. And then what is the best way for listeners to start exploring KeyNotes and learn if it would be a good fit for their studio? Where can they start to check out the content that Melanie Bowes is putting out into the world?
So you can visit the website, which is keynotes-music.com. And there is a blog on there with lots of information. You can join the email list. I send out weekly emails just around group piano more generally. and my thoughts on various aspects of teaching in groups. I would say the website is the best place to start. And I love having discovery calls with studio owners and teachers who are thinking about KeyNotes, but would like, to have a good look at the materials and to have a chat with me to see if it's the right program for them.
I love it. Melanie, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love your perspective. I love your approach. Keep doing what you're doing. And we're going to wrap it up for this episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
All right. We'll see you next time. If you have topic suggestions or questions, please contact us at info@rockschoolproprietor.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear suggestions for future shows. We've put together some free resources for teachers and studio owners over at rockschoolproprietor.com and a private Facebook group called The Modern Music School. Please join us over there. On social, I'm at rock.school.proprietor on Instagram and John Kazicki on both LinkedIn and Blue Sky. Your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify are always appreciated. And if you enjoyed the show and gain insight from our conversation, then we count that as a win. All we ask in return is that you pay it forward and please share the show with someone you think needs to hear it.